Every year, tens of thousands of people drive past the iconic Jones Beach water tower. But few know about the man whose name and legacy has left an indelible mark on the Long Island landscape. So let's discover the story of Major Thomas Jones. A soldier, a sailor, a whaler, a sheriff, and perhaps even a pirate, Thomas Jones was a complex man of many talents, whose story begins a long way from the shores of Long Island, across the Atlantic, and all the way back to 17th century Ireland. Growing up in Strabane, a town in the north of Ireland, Thomas Jones came of age in a time of war, when two kings, James II and William of Orange, came to Ireland to fight over who had the right to sit on the English throne. Joining the Jacobite forces supporting King James, Thomas Jones fought and survived several bloody battles and a long siege until finally, in October of 1691, the Jacobites were forced to admit defeat. Under the terms of surrender laid out in the Treaty of Limerick, the Jacobites were allowed to keep their weapons and withdraw to France, an event that became known as the Flight of the Wild Geese. Sailing away from his homeland, Thomas Jones could little imagine the future that awaited him. In France, the remaining Jacobite soldiers, around 14,000 of them, were organized into an Irish brigade that would serve in the wars of the French king Louis XIV. It's uncertain if Thomas Jones became part of this brigade. The sources claim that he suffered a deep depression, and it wasn't long before he turned his sights to the freedom of the sea. This began perhaps the most debated part of the Thomas Jones story. Did he become a privateer, or did he become a pirate? From his refuge in France, the now dethroned James II offered Thomas a letter of marque to sail against the Spanish ships supporting King William. Seeing this as a way out of his depression, Thomas Jones quickly fitted out a ship and took to the seas, where he would build his reputation and his fortune. The ship he sailed off on was most likely a Bermuda sloop, because due to its sleek design and speed, this was the favored vessel of both pirates and privateers at the time. Little specifics are known about this period of Jones's life, but all sources agree that he sailed the Caribbean and was in the pirate haven of Port Royal on the island of Jamaica when it suffered a devastating earthquake. At the time, Port Royal was described as the most wicked and sinful city in the world, a place famous for its booze, its prostitutes, and its pirates. On the morning of June 7th, 1692, a massive 7.5 magnitude earthquake hit the island. An eyewitness wrote, "The sand in the street rose like the waves of the sea, lifting up all persons that stood upon it, and immediately dropping them down into pits. And at the same instant, a flood of water rushed in, throwing down all who were in its way." In the end, most of the city disappeared under the water, and over 2,000 people were killed. It was an apocalyptic event that changed the very shape of the island, and one that Thomas Jones was lucky to survive. Somehow, Thomas Jones made it back to England a month after the Port Royal earthquake, only to be arrested by King William III. According to the sources, Thomas Jones, along with several others, was put on trial for piracy. In their defense, they argued that we are all natives of Ireland and were in actual service of King James, and all along acted under his commissions, from the time that the Prince of Orange invaded England to the time of the surrender of Limerick. That we, with several thousand more, conveyed as enemies into France, were continued still to act and serve under King James's commission as our king. Basically, this said that Thomas Jones was still a loyal subject of King James and sailing against his enemies, and was not acting as a pirate. But what's the difference between a privateer and a pirate? They both attack merchant ships and steal their cargo, right? Well, yes, but one is doing it without any official authority, and the other is doing it under what's called a letter of marque. A letter of marque is a government license to attack and capture vessels of a nation at war with the issuer. Either way, Thomas Jones seemed to be quite successful, because by the time he arrived in the Americas, he was a man of wealth and reputation. Sometime around late 1692, early 1693, after being acquitted in the English court, Jones found his way to the Americas. Ironically, this was a place with many safe havens for pirates and rogue privateers, which did nothing to dispel his reputation as a pirate. Newport and Providence alone were so welcoming to pirates that they were considered ideal places for men like William Kidd and Blackbeard to recruit, rest, or even take up a residence. And there were many opportunities to be found for men of this character. At this time, the governor of New York, Colonel Benjamin Fletcher, saw freebooters the word they used for pirates, as men who carried real money into the impoverished colony. It wasn't long before Colonel Fletcher commissioned Thomas Jones as captain in the New York militia and tasked him with attacking Spanish ships and bringing their wealth back to New York. This may have been seen as piracy by the Spanish, but it was piracy with that official stamp. This commission and some of the friendships Jones would build during this time would later come back to haunt him. But one particular friendship would offer Jones a path to a future as a prominent landholder if he ever chose to leave the life of a sailor. During this time, Jones became close friends with Captain Thomas Townsend, who was a member of one of the most influential families on Rhode Island. Jones must have really hit it off with the Townsend family, because it wasn't long before he married Thomas Townsend's young daughter, Freelove. However, shortly after the marriage, Jones fit out a new ship and set out to fulfill his commission as a New York privateer. This would take him to sea and away from his young wife for 3 years. There are no reasons listed in the sources that can tell us why Thomas Jones went back to the sea immediately after his marriage. Maybe it was because he felt that he had a family to support. Maybe he was afraid that if he left the sea, he would once again fall back into a depression. Or maybe it was just because he loved the thrill of high seas adventure. Unfortunately, we may never know. After spending 3 years roving the seas, Thomas Jones finally returned home to settle down with his wife. He didn't entirely walk away from the sailor's life, but his story now turns more and more towards a life out on the frontiers of Long Island. But that's a story for another time. Thank you for watching, and be sure to check out part 3 as I continue the story of Major Thomas Jones.